The room was eerily silent. A cold, unnerving stillness hung in the air, broken only by the distant wail of sirens that seemed to get closer with each passing second. The blood-stained letter, now crumpled and lying on the floor, remained the only trace of the chaos that had transpired earlier that night. The small, soft hum of the baby monitor echoed in the background, its static-filled whispers carrying a heavy weight of dread. It had been an ordinary evening before it all fell apart. Sarah, the young mother of a newborn, had been sitting in the living room, nursing her baby, unaware of the horrific message that would soon shatter her reality. At first, she thought it was a malfunction, a simple error perhaps, but then the voice came through, clear and unmistakable. "I know you're listening," it said, sending a cold shiver down her spine. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized that the message was meant for her. The voice, distorted and sinister, was unfamiliar yet somehow hauntingly close. She grabbed the baby monitor, hands trembling, and tried to make sense of the garbled message. The baby's soft cooing seemed to grow louder in contrast to the voice that continued to echo in the background, a threat in every word. "You'll never be safe again," it said, sending Sarah's mind spiraling into panic. This wasn't just a glitch. This was someone who knew she was there, someone who knew far too much. As Sarah's world began to crumble, the phone on the counter rang, the sound sharp and piercing, dragging her back into reality. She didn't answer. Not yet. Not until she figured out who was behind this. Who was watching her. Sarah's hands shook uncontrollably as she held the baby monitor close to her face. Her mind raced, her thoughts swirling in a chaotic fog. The voice had been unmistakable, familiar even, yet it carried a sinister undertone that unsettled her to the core. She wasn't alone. She hadn't been alone for a while. But who could it be? A friend? A prank? The eerie feeling in her gut told her it was far from either. The room felt smaller now, the air thick with an invisible presence. Sarah glanced nervously at the dark corners of the room, hoping to see nothing. But the silence was deafening. She had to act. She had to figure this out, or she'd be consumed by the unknown terror that loomed just out of sight. She had to know who was behind the voice. She had to know if her baby was safe. It wasn't just the message, it was everything that came with it. The darkness, the fear, the feeling of being watched. She had to fight back before it was too late. But the question was, how? The minutes stretched on, each one feeling heavier than the last. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps as she turned the baby monitor over in her hands, hoping for some clue, something to tell her that this was all just a mistake. But the voice had been too clear, too deliberate. Her mind kept returning to it, trying to place it, trying to rationalize the impossible. Was it a prank? Was someone messing with her? It didn't make sense. She hadn't told anyone about her new baby, hadn't shared details of her life in months. She'd been reclusive after the birth, overwhelmed by the demands of motherhood. The silence in the house seemed to press in on her, each second a reminder of the unknown danger that loomed just outside her perception. A sudden faint sound broke her from her thoughts, a soft scuff, followed by the unmistakable click of a door closing. It was coming from upstairs. She froze. Her baby, safe in her arms, slept soundly, oblivious to the rising tension. But Sarah could feel it. Something was out of place. Her heart began to race, a primal instinct kicking in. Slowly she stood, careful not to disturb the baby, and moved towards the staircase. Each step felt like an eternity, as if the house itself was holding its breath. At the top of the stairs she paused, listening. Another sound. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable. Someone was here. The steps were slow, measured but unmistakable. Sarah's pulse quickened. She could feel the presence before she saw it. She didn't know what it was, but her instincts screamed that she was not alone. She reached for the railing, her fingers tightening around it as she steadied herself. Her baby, still sound asleep in her arms, didn't stir. The contrast between the baby's peaceful sleep and Sarah's rising panic felt surreal. Every sound seemed amplified now. The creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of the air conditioning, the soft rustle of the curtains swaying in the breeze. But the footsteps, those were the only things that mattered. She crept forward, inching toward the hallway. The light from the monitor on the coffee table flickered in the distance, an eerie reminder that whatever was happening was tied to her home, to her life. She could hear a soft chuckle, soft but menacing, come from the end of the hall. A voice, familiar, low and chilling. She knew it. But how? Why? She called out softly, her voice barely a whisper. Who's there? Her voice broke through the silence, but there was no answer. Only the sound of footsteps moving toward her. Hello? Sarah's voice trembled, though she tried to keep it steady. Her feet moved instinctively, guided by a mixture of fear and the desperate need to protect her child. She wanted to call the police, but the phone was downstairs, and she couldn't leave the baby alone. A soft thud echoed from the room at the end of the hall, followed by a pause, then the unmistakable sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate, just loud enough for her to hear. Her body went rigid, her mind racing. Her legs felt like they were made of lead, yet she continued to move, inch by inch, the tension so thick she could almost taste it. The breathing stopped. Silence. But it was the kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. A silence so deep that it seemed to draw in every other sound around her. She moved closer to the door. The light from the hallway barely illuminated the room inside, but it was enough to make out the shadows of furniture. She reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered near the doorknob. Then she froze. The door creaked open just a fraction more, and a dark figure emerged from the shadows. The figure stood there, motionless, as if waiting for her to make the next move. She opened her mouth to scream, but the words never came. Her breath hitched in her throat, and the figure stepped forward. "I know you're in there," the voice said again, distorted yet familiar. "You can't run from me." The following days passed in a blur. Sarah tried to act normal, to put on a brave face for her baby, but her mind was consumed by the voice on the baby monitor. Sleep eluded her. Every creak of the house, every whisper of wind against the windows felt like a signal, a warning. She had to know who it was who was watching her. The feeling of being hunted gnawed at her every waking moment. She couldn't shake the image of the blood-stained letter, its contents unreadable, but somehow tied to the message. She had kept the letter in her hand, inspecting it over and over, hoping for some clue, some trace of the sender. But there was nothing, just the blood. The silence had returned, but it was oppressive, filling every room like a heavy fog. Sarah knew she had to take action, to stop hiding and face whatever was happening. But every time she thought about calling the authorities, she hesitated. What would she say? How could she explain a mysterious message over a baby monitor? Would they believe her? Or would they think she was losing her mind? The anxiety gnawed at her, making her second-guess every decision. But the voice was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, pushing her closer to the edge. It was the middle of the night when Sarah first noticed it. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A low hum coming from the baby monitor. She had heard it before, of course, but this time it felt different. There was something deliberate about it, as though someone were waiting, watching, just beyond the threshold. Her heart raced as she slowly moved toward the monitor, her breath shallow, the weight of her fear building with each step. The light from the monitor flickered, casting erratic shadows across the room. Sarah hesitated before pressing the button. When the static finally cleared, there was the voice again, low and menacing. "I know you can hear me," it whispered. The words sent a shock through her. Her fingers trembled on the button, as if afraid the voice might escalate, become more direct. What did it want? Was it a threat, or was it simply playing with her? The baby monitor crackled once more, followed by another chilling whisper. "You're not safe here." This time Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the monitor and ran out of the room, her mind whirling with panic. The days following the incident passed slowly. Sarah felt trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. She tried to convince herself that it was just her imagination, that the stress of motherhood and the recent events had caused her to hear things. But deep down she knew the truth. Someone was out there. Someone was watching her. And it wasn't just the baby monitor. No, the sensation was creeping into every part of her life now. Her phone rang at odd hours, always when she was alone. She would pick it up, only to hear a breath on the other end, before the line went dead. The silence was maddening. It was as if whoever it was trying to get inside her head. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She had to find answers, even if it meant confronting the darkness head-on. With trembling hands she started searching through her phone, looking for any trace of a clue, anything that might lead her to the source. She checked her calls, her messages, even her emails. But there was nothing. The only thing she found was a simple voicemail, the message chillingly short. "I know what you saw." Sarah stood frozen, the weight of the message pressing down on her chest. "I know what you saw." The words echoed in her mind, replaying over and over. What did it mean? What had she seen? She couldn't think clearly anymore. Her thoughts were racing, tumbling over one another in a desperate scramble for meaning. She thought back to that night, the one she couldn't remember. The night everything changed. Had she seen something? Had she missed something crucial? The baby monitor, the voice, the blood-stained letter? Was it all connected? She didn't know. She didn't have the answers. But she had to find them. She had to know who was behind this, why they were tormenting her. Was it someone she knew? Someone close to her? The idea that it might be a friend or family member made her stomach churn. She couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not even herself. The next morning, Sarah decided she couldn't live in fear anymore. She couldn't keep hiding from the unknown. It was time to confront whatever was out there, whatever was tormenting her. She packed a bag, grabbed her phone and drove to the police station. She had to tell someone. But the fear inside her never subsided. What if they didn't believe her? What if they thought she was crazy? She arrived at the station, her heart pounding in her chest as she stepped out of the car. The building loomed ahead, cold and uninviting, but she knew this was the only way. She walked through the doors, her voice shaky as she approached the desk. "I need to report something. Someone's been watching me." It had been a week since Sarah went to the police. She had filed her report, but nothing had come of it. The officers had listened, nodded, and promised to look into it, but they couldn't see what she saw. The baby monitor was still silent, but the unease lingered. The dark shadows that danced on the edges of her vision had not gone away. It felt like the walls of her home were closing in, and she couldn't escape. Even the familiar, comforting sounds of her baby cooing from the crib seemed to carry a hidden warning now. Every time she picked up the monitor, it felt like someone, was there, just outside of her view. Sarah tried to carry on with life, to make it seem like she wasn't affected, but the nagging sense that she was being watched gnawed at her. When she wasn't looking, shadows seemed to move in the corners of the room. Doors she was sure she had closed were ajar, windows that should have been locked were open. Was someone inside her home? She couldn't shake the feeling. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind outside, sent her into a heightened state of alert. She couldn't trust anything anymore. And then came the phone call, the call that would turn everything upside down. The phone rang again. Sarah stared at it for a moment, hesitant. She picked up the receiver, her heart racing as she brought it to her ear. "Hello?" she asked, her voice trembling. There was a long pause on the other end before a faint, almost imperceptible whisper came through the line. "I know you're scared." The voice was low and distorted, just like the one from the baby monitor. The same chilling message. Sarah's blood ran cold. Her grip tightened on the phone. "Who is this? What do you want?" she demanded, trying to steady her voice. The voice on the other end didn't answer immediately. For a moment, there was only the sound of static, and then, "You can't hide forever." Sarah's mind raced. She recognized the voice, but it wasn't possible. She didn't know anyone who could sound like that. The fear that had been mounting inside her spilled over, her breath shallow and quick. "Stop," she whispered, barely able to get the word out. "Please stop." But the voice continued, "You'll never be safe again." Then there was a click, and the line went dead. She stood there, the phone pressed against her ear, the silence ringing in her ears. Her world tilted. Shaken, Sarah hung up the phone and dropped it onto the counter. The words from the voice still echoed in her mind, the weight of the threat heavy on her chest. Her hands shook as she turned to face the room, every corner now feeling like a trap. She had to do something. She couldn't keep living like this, in fear of an unseen enemy. With trembling hands, she grabbed her coat and rushed outside, determined to find answers. The night air was cold, biting at her skin as she walked swiftly down the sidewalk. She had no plan, no idea what she was doing, but she knew she couldn't stay in that house any longer. She needed help, and she needed it now. The streets were eerily quiet as she moved through the city, her footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Every shadow seemed to watch her, every car that passed too close made her jump. Sarah was no longer sure of what was real, and what was just her paranoia. Her mind was spinning, filled with confusion and fear. She had come so close to breaking, but she couldn't. Not now. Sarah reached a small coffee shop on the corner, its warm light spilling out into the street like a beacon. She walked in without thinking, moving quickly toward the counter. The barista, a young man with a friendly smile, greeted her, but she barely registered his presence. "Can I get you something?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the room, as though searching for something, or someone. The feeling of being watched hadn't left her, and now, in the calm of the coffee shop, it was even more suffocating. She ordered a coffee without thinking, and sat at the back, her mind still spinning. Every time she tried to focus, she heard the voice again in her head, repeating the same haunting words. "You'll never be safe again." The message was simple, yet its meaning was terrifyingly vague. Sarah didn't know what it meant, but she had to find out. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves, but the tremor in her hands wouldn't go away. As Sarah sat in the coffee shop, her mind raced. She had no idea who could be behind the messages, but she knew one thing for sure. It wasn't just a coincidence. The voice, the blood-stained letter, it all pointed to someone who knew far too much about her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the voice wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. Someone was trying to send her a message, but what did it mean? She couldn't make sense of it, but the need for answers was growing stronger with each passing second. She needed help, but who could she trust? She couldn't go to the police again, not after they had brushed her off. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. She pulled it out and saw a new message notification. The text was short and cryptic. "You're too late." She felt a wave of panic wash over her, but before she could respond, the screen went black. The fear that had been building inside her finally broke free, and she rushed out of the coffee shop, her heart pounding in her chest. Sarah was sitting in the dark, staring at the glowing baby monitor. The room around her was dim, lit only by the soft glow from the monitor and the moonlight streaming in through the window. The message from the phone call earlier still rang in her ears. "You're too late." She had tried to understand it, tried to make sense of the cryptic words, but the more she thought about it, the less she understood. What did it mean? And why did it feel like she was running out of time? Her hands trembled as she reached for the monitor again, not sure what she was hoping for. Maybe another message. Maybe a clue that would help her piece it all together. As the static flickered on the screen, she felt a rush of adrenaline. Was this it? Was the stalker trying to reach her again? But instead of the distorted voice she expected, the screen cleared, revealing a brief fuzzy image. A face. The image flickered for a split second, then disappeared. Sarah blinked, unsure if what she saw was real or just a trick of the monitor. But her heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't imagining it. Someone had just appeared on the screen, and she needed to know who. Sarah quickly grabbed her phone and rushed to the front door, her heart racing. She had to find out who was behind this. The cryptic messages The ominous voice. It had to be connected to something. Maybe someone she knew? Maybe someone from her past? The thought made her stomach churn. She couldn't think clearly. Panic set in, clouding her judgment. As she stepped outside, the cold air hit her like a shock, but she didn't care. She walked briskly down the street, her mind racing, her eyes darting from side to side as she tried to stay focused. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out quickly, praying it was a message that would give her the answer she was desperately seeking. But when she opened the message, it was from an unknown number. "I know what you did." The words sent a wave of nausea through her. What was going on? Who was doing this to her? Every inch of her body screamed that she was being watched, that she was out of time. She had to confront whatever or whoever this was. The message, "I know what you did," was like a blow to Sarah's chest. What did it mean? What had she done? The words gnawed at her as she walked through the empty street, the light from the street lamp casting a pale glow on her path. The past few days felt like a whirlwind of confusion and fear. It wasn't just the voice on the baby monitor or the disturbing messages. It was the realization that someone she didn't recognize, knew intimate details about her life. She couldn't stop the thoughts from racing in her mind. Was it someone from her childhood? A former friend or lover? Could it be someone from her past who had been waiting for the right moment to strike? She couldn't shake the feeling that this was all part of something bigger, something she couldn't even begin to understand. Every step she took felt heavier, her body moving on autopilot as her mind spiraled deeper into terror. The street ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, the shadows playing tricks on her eyes. Sarah stopped walking suddenly, a chilling realization hitting her. The message. "I know what you did." It was about the night her life changed. The night she couldn't remember. She had been trying to block it out for so long, but the truth was always there, lingering beneath the surface. It was a night that had haunted her. A night she couldn't recall, but one she knew had shaped everything that followed. The fear, the paranoia. It all started that night. She had buried it deep, tried to convince herself that it wasn't important, but now she saw it clearly. Someone knew. Someone knew about her missing memories, the things she'd forgotten. Her heart raced as she turned back toward her house. This was it. This was the key. The answers lay in that night, in what she had done and what she had forgotten. But was she ready to face it? Was she ready to uncover the truth, no matter how dark it was? As Sarah made her way back to the house, her mind spun with possibilities. She couldn't shake the feeling that the answers were right there, just beyond her reach. But what if she wasn't ready to uncover them? What if the truth was worse than she could imagine? She couldn't deny the fear in her chest, the fear that had been with her since that night, since the moment everything changed. She couldn't escape it. Every door she opened, every corner she turned, felt like it was leading her back to that night. And now, with every step, she was closer to the truth. She knew she couldn't turn back now. The door creaked as she pushed it open, the silence inside the house, suffocating. Her steps were quiet, almost hesitant, as she walked through the darkened halls. This was it. This was where it would all come crashing down. The tension in the air was palpable, so thick that Sarah could almost taste it. Every step she took felt like it echoed through the darkened house, every movement slow and deliberate. Her mind was racing. She had to face whatever this was. The thought of running, of escaping to safety crossed her mind, but the nagging voice in her head told her she couldn't. She had to stay, had to confront the terror that had been building around her. The realization that someone had been watching her, waiting for her to crack, had been too much to bear. But now, there was no turning back. The door to the basement creaked as she approached it, the sound sending a chill through her bones. She reached for the handle, her fingers cold and stiff. She had to know what was in there. She had to see for herself. What if she was wrong? What if this was all just her mind playing tricks on her? But the weight of her own fear told her otherwise. Something was waiting for her in the darkness, something that would explain everything. As she descended into the basement, The cold air grew heavier, the darkness more oppressive. The faintest sound of footsteps echoed from below, and Sarah froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Sarah's feet finally hit the cold concrete floor of the basement. The darkness enveloped her, but she didn't move. Her breath was shallow, and she held her phone out in front of her, the only source of light in the oppressive dark. The silence was deafening. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The basement was damp, the smell of mildew and old wood filling the air. It looked abandoned, forgotten. Yet she could feel something watching her, something just out of sight. The fear that had been growing inside her was now a tangible presence, choking the air around her. Every inch of the space felt like it was closing in. She stepped forward, cautiously, the coldness of the concrete floor creeping through her shoes. The shadows shifted with every movement she made, as if alive. The tension was unbearable. She wasn't alone. She could feel it, could sense the presence just beyond the edge of her vision. And then, in the corner of the room, a figure emerged from the shadows. Someone she thought she'd never see again. Her breath caught in her throat as the figure stepped closer, their face finally coming into view. It was Jake, her brother, the last person she had ever expected to see, especially here, in the darkness of the basement. Her mind reeled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Jake's expression was cold, distant, and completely unlike the brother she remembered. Why? Sarah finally managed to choke out, her voice trembling. Why are you doing this? Jake didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, his eyes narrowing as he studied her, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his lips. I had to see how far you'd go, he said, his voice low and almost cruel. How far you'd fall. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She couldn't understand. What had he meant by that? What had he done? The questions piled up in her mind, each one more confusing than the last. Sarah took a step back, but Jake's figure seemed to grow larger with each passing second. He was blocking the way out. She couldn't escape. Jake's smirk faded as he stepped closer, the space between them growing smaller with each of his deliberate movements. Sarah backed away, her hands trembling, the light from her phone flickering as she tried to steady it. I didn't want you to know, Jake said, his voice almost sorrowful, but the darkness in his tone remained unmistakable. But you were always so predictable. Sarah could barely breathe. What are you talking about? She gasped. You think I didn't know? You think I didn't see how you were unraveling? Jake continued, his eyes now gleaming with something darker. It was too easy to watch you fall apart. He reached out, grabbing her wrist, his grip like iron. The shock of his touch sent a wave of panic through her. You set me up, Sarah whispered, the truth dawning on her like a cold slap to the face. You were the one watching me all along. You're the one who... Her words trailed off as Jake smiled. You're getting it now, he said. The realization crushed her. Everything, the messages, the surveillance, the lies, it had all been him. Sarah struggled against Jake's grip, but it was useless. He was too strong. The realization hit her with a gut-wrenching finality. The man she had trusted, the one person she had always looked to for protection, was the one who had been tormenting her. She had no escape. Every ounce of courage she had left drained away as she realized that no one could save her now, not even herself. Jake's laughter filled the basement, cold and mocking. You should have listened to me, Sarah, he sneered. You should have known. The sound of his voice echoed in the small confined space, a constant reminder of her betrayal. This is where it ends, Jake continued. This is where your story ends. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she realized she had no choice. The darkness was closing in, and the air was thick with the weight of what had happened. She was trapped, and there was no way out. Sarah was trapped, unable to move, her heart racing as Jake's grip tightened around her wrist. She could barely breathe, the weight of his betrayal crushing her. How could this have happened? How could the one person she had trusted her whole life be the one who had been tormenting her all along. His cold, emotionless gaze burned into her, and for a moment, all she could do was stare at him, her mind struggling to process the truth. But then, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to die here, not like this. She had to fight. She had to survive. "You've made a mistake," Sarah said, her voice trembling but steadying as the words left her lips. "You won't get away with this." Jake just laughed, a dark, humorless sound that echoed through the basement. "I already have," he replied, his grip loosening as he stepped back slightly. Sarah took a deep breath, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She was done being the victim. She had to do whatever it took to stop him, to make him pay for everything he had done. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah pushed herself off the wall, using her knees to propel her body into a desperate run. She darted across the basement, her feet barely making a sound on the cold concrete floor. The flickering light overhead made it hard to see, but she didn't care. She was running on pure instinct now, her only focus on escape. Her heart raced in her chest as she reached the stairs, each step an agonizing battle to get out. The cold air from the door above her felt like a distant promise of safety, but the pounding footsteps behind her told her it wasn't over. Jake was following, but Sarah was faster now, driven by the sheer will to survive. She didn't look back. She couldn't. As she reached the top of the stairs and shoved the door open, a rush of cold night air hit her face, filling her lungs with relief. But just as she stepped into the yard, she heard Jake's voice, low and dangerous, just behind her. "You think you can escape me?" Sarah was outside now, the cold night air filling her lungs as she ran across the yard. The lights from the street lamps cut through the darkness, but there was no sign of help, no one around to hear her cries. She had no choice but to keep running, her feet pounding against the earth as she tried to put distance between herself and Jake. But she wasn't fast enough. As she reached the fence, she turned to look over her shoulder and saw Jake standing in the doorway, watching her with cold, calculating eyes. She had to make it to the street. She had to make it to safety. Sarah's breath came in quick gasps, her body burning with exhaustion, but she didn't stop. She didn't let the fear take over. She had to survive. The thought of the baby monitor, of the messages, of everything he had done to her, pushed her forward. She couldn't stop now. "I'll never stop coming for you," Jake shouted from the yard, his voice carrying across the darkness. But Sarah didn't care. She kept running. Sarah reached the street, the harsh light of the street lamps casting long shadows across the pavement. She couldn't stop running, couldn't afford to slow down, but her body was giving out. Her legs burned with the effort, her breath came in ragged gasps, and her chest ached with every beat of her heart. But she kept going, determined to reach the safety of the neighborhood. She could hear Jake's footsteps behind her, but they were growing fainter, and with each step, the sound of his pursuit began to fade. She glanced over her shoulder one last time, and saw Jake standing in the yard, watching her, his face full of rage and frustration. She was almost there. Just a few more steps, and she would be free. She just had to get to the end of the street, to the place where someone would see her, where she would be safe. Sarah finally stumbled to a stop, her body giving out as she collapsed onto the sidewalk. Her heart was still racing, her breath ragged, but she was safe. The fear that had consumed her for so long began to dissipate as she realized the weight of what had just happened. She was free. The nightmare was over. As she sat there, catching her breath, the distant sound of sirens grew louder, and she knew they were on their way. She had made it out. She had survived. The truth had been exposed, and Sarah would never have to face Jake again. But as she looked down at her shaking hands, the weight of the ordeal still hung heavy in the air. She wasn't sure how she would move forward from here, but she knew one thing: she would never let fear control her again. She had fought for her life, and she had won. Sarah stood at the edge of a quiet, windswept cliff, the cold air biting against her skin as she gazed out at the vast expanse of the ocean below. The waves crashed relentlessly against the rocks, a soothing rhythm that contrasted with the chaos of her thoughts. It had been days since she had escaped the nightmare, but the fear still lingered in her bones, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. She had told the authorities everything, every detail, every confession. Jake's arrest had been swift, but the horror of what had happened, the betrayal, still gnawed at her. The hardest part of surviving, she had learned, was not escaping the physical danger, but confronting the emotional scars it left behind. The truth was out, and the nightmare was over, but Sarah couldn't escape the quiet whispers in her mind, the what-ifs, the lingering doubt. "I survived," she whispered to herself, the words sounding foreign as they left her lips. The air felt like it carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken truths. But this was her new reality, one she had to live with. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. The calm of the ocean before her seemed to mirror the stillness inside her, a stillness that had been forced upon her through fear and loss. She had walked away from the nightmare, but in doing so, she had left a part of herself behind. There was no going back to who she was before, no returning to the woman who had once known peace. The fight for survival had changed her in ways she couldn't fully grasp. She had learned to be stronger, yes, but also more guarded, more wary of the world around her. She could never unsee what she had seen, never forget the voice on the baby monitor, or the coldness in Jake's eyes as he had watched her fall apart. But the hardest part wasn't surviving. It was learning to live with the truth of what had happened, the truth of who had hurt her. And now, as she stood there on that cliff, Sarah had a decision to make: live with the past, or let it consume her. The distant wail of sirens was the first sound Sarah heard after what felt like hours of silence. She hadn't realized how much time had passed. Her thoughts had been consumed by the past, by everything she had endured. But now, standing on that cliff, she realized she was no longer just the victim in her own story. She had survived. The truth had set her free, but it had also burdened her with a weight she wasn't sure she could carry. The truth of what Jake had done, of what he had turned her life into, was not something she could easily forget. But she didn't have to carry it alone. The authorities were doing their part, and for the first time, Sarah realized she didn't have to solve everything by herself. Her survival wasn't about escaping or running away. It was about confronting her past head-on, facing the truth, and finding the strength to keep going. She could live with the truth, even if it was hard. She could live with the scar of it, as long as it no longer defined her. The sound of footsteps behind her startled Sarah, and she turned quickly to find a figure approaching. It was a woman, an officer from the local police station. Sarah's heart beat faster, unsure of what was happening. Was Jake out? Was she still in danger? But the officer's calm demeanor put her at ease. "We're doing everything we can," the officer said, her voice firm yet gentle. "We've got him, Sarah. You're safe now." Sarah nodded, relief flooding her chest, though it was tempered by the weight of everything she had gone through. "I'm glad it's over," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of her healing process. The emotional scars would take time to fade. But for now, the nightmare was truly over. The officer turned to leave, and Sarah stood there for a long moment, watching her walk away. It was over, but the question still lingered. How would she move forward? As the officer walked away, Sarah's eyes drifted back to the horizon, the sea now blending with the night. The full moon had risen, casting a pale light over the water's surface. The quiet of the night felt almost surreal after the chaos she had experienced. In this stillness she found something she hadn't had in a long time: peace. The darkness had tested her, had pushed her to the brink, but she had emerged from it stronger. She wasn't the same woman who had stood in that house, terrified and broken. She was someone else now, someone who had learned to face the truth and survive. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to face it. "The hardest part of surviving," Sarah said softly to herself, "is learning how to live with the truth." And with that she turned, walking away from the edge of the cliff, her steps steady and resolute.